Single dad is ignored by the CEO until the pilot becomes incapacitated and he steps up. David Mitchell gently rocked little Ethan in his arms while trying to calm him down in the narrow airplane aisle. His simple blue shirt was slightly wrinkled from the long wait at LaGuardia Airport, and his glasses slid down his nose as he whispered sweet words to the softly whimpering 6-month-old baby. Beside him, Jennifer Reynolds rolled her eyes with visible irritation. The executive adjusted her impeccable dark blazer and pulled her leather briefcase further away when David needed to lean lightly on her seat to keep his balance with his son in his arms. "Sorry," murmured David, trying not to bother the woman who was clearly showing her discomfort with their presence any further. "Some people really shouldn't fly in business class," commented Jennifer under her breath, but loud enough for him to hear. David felt his face grow warm, but he just held Ethan a little tighter against his chest and continued walking toward his seat. He had saved for months to buy those business class tickets, not for luxury, but because the flight from New York City to Miami would be long, and he needed the extra space to care for the baby during the trip. "Daddy's here, my love," he whispered to Ethan, who was finally starting to calm down. "We'll see Grandma Margaret soon." Jennifer watched the scene with disdain as she put her documents away in her briefcase. At 42, she had built an empire in the civil aviation sector, running the country's largest aircraft components company. She had no time for sentimentality, or for people who, in her opinion, didn't know how to behave properly in professional environments. What she didn't know was that this simple man with glasses and a wrinkled shirt had saved her life years before. David settled carefully into his seat, checking to make sure Ethan was comfortable in his lap. His hands, calloused from years of working as an aircraft mechanic, contrasted with the gentleness with which he held his son. It was hard to believe that those same hands a few years ago had commanded aircraft with the precision of a master. "Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen," the flight attendant announced over the sound system. "On behalf of Captain Amanda Williams and the entire crew, welcome to American Airways Flight 4847, bound for Miami. Our estimated flight time is 1 hour and 40 minutes. Jennifer checked her watch. She had an important meeting in Miami at 5 p.m., and every minute counted. Her business couldn't wait, especially now that she was closing the biggest contract in her company's history with an international firm. Ethan started to whimper again, and David immediately began to rock him gently, humming a lullaby his mother used to sing to him when he was a child. The soft melody echoed quietly, but it was enough to irritate Jennifer even more. "Excuse me," she called, signaling to the flight attendant passing through the aisle. "Wouldn't it possible to transfer this gentleman and the child to economy class? The crying is interfering with my work." The flight attendant, a middle-aged woman with a professional smile, looked at David apologetically. "Ma'am, I'm sorry, but the flight is completely full. We don't have any available seats in other classes. Furthermore, all passengers have an equal right to be here." "I understand your rules," replied Jennifer, slightly raising her voice. "But I also understand that a serious airline should consider the comfort of all passengers, especially those traveling on business." David felt all eyes turn to him and Ethan. Embarrassment washed over his face, but he remained calm, continuing to rock his son. "I can try to keep him quieter," offered David, his voice almost a whisper. "It's just that he's not used to traveling." "He shouldn't be here if he can't control him," retorted Jennifer, turning her attention back to her documents. The flight attendant gave David a sympathetic look before moving away. She had seen many situations like this throughout her 15-year career, and it always saddened her to see how some people could be cruel to parents who were just trying to take care of their children. David closed his eyes for a moment, remembering the advice his mother, Margaret, always gave him. "My son, people judge what they don't know. You know who you are, and that's what matters." Margaret Mitchell had raised David alone after her husband left when the boy was just 8 years old. She worked as a cleaner at the Miami airport, and it was there that David developed his passion for aviation. He would spend entire afternoons watching the planes take off and land, dreaming of one day piloting one himself. That dream became a reality when David got a scholarship for a civil aviation course. For years, he was one of the most respected pilots in the country, known for his skill in emergency situations and his dedication to passenger safety. Everything changed 2 years ago, when his wife Sarah became ill during labor. What was supposed to be the happiest day of their lives turned into a tragedy when she developed serious complications. David had to choose between his career and caring for his newborn son, who was left without a mother. He didn't hesitate for a second. He left commercial aviation and became an aircraft mechanic, a job that gave him more flexible hours to raise Ethan alone. The salary was much lower, but he preferred to have less money and more time with his son. Ethan finally fell asleep in his father's lap, and David took the opportunity to discreetly observe the woman next to him. Jennifer was typing furiously on her laptop, speaking quietly on the phone about contracts and technical specifications. There was something familiar about her, but he couldn't figure out what it was. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us, who are just starting out, now continuing. The takeoff was smooth, and New York City was left behind through the airplane windows. David always felt a pang in his heart, leaving the city where he had met Sarah, but he knew this trip to Miami was important. His mother wasn't in good health, and he wanted her to get to know her grandson better before it was too late. Margaret had been overjoyed when she found out she would finally meet Ethan in person. At 70 years old, she was still working, but arthritis was making each day more difficult. David planned to convince her to retire and come live with him and Ethan in New York City. "Sorry to bother you again," Jennifer said to a passing flight attendant, "but would it be possible to make an exception and move me to another row? The baby smell is giving me a headache." The flight attendant sighed discreetly. "Ma'am, as I explained earlier, we don't have any available seats. The flight is completely full." "So you've put me in an unacceptable situation," Jennifer replied, raising her voice again. "I pay a lot for this class exactly to avoid this kind of inconvenience." David felt the tension growing around him. Other passengers began to look in their direction, some with expressions of disapproval aimed at Jennifer, others with pity for him. "Ma'am," intervened an elderly passenger from the front seat, turning to face Jennifer. "This young father is doing his best to keep the child quiet. We were all babies once, and someone had patience with us." "Mind your own business," Jennifer retorted, without looking up from her documents. The elderly passenger shook her head in disapproval and turned to David with a gentle smile. "What a beautiful baby," she commented. "How many months?" "6 months, ma'am," David replied, grateful for the kindness. "It's his first time flying to meet his great-grandmother." "How exciting!" the woman exclaimed. "I'm sure she'll be delighted." David smiled, feeling a little better. There were good people in the world, and not everyone was like the executive next to him. The flight continued without major incidents for another 40 minutes. Ethan remained sleeping peacefully, and David took the opportunity to rest a little, leaning his head against the seatback. He had woken up at 4 in the morning to get to the airport on time, and the fatigue was starting to weigh on him. That's when the first turbulence hit the plane. The aircraft shook violently, causing some objects to fall from the overhead compartments. Ethan woke up frightened and started to cry, while passengers gripped the armrests. "Attention, passengers," the captain's voice announced over the intercom, trying to remain calm. "We are passing through an area of turbulence. Please keep your seatbelts fastened and remain in your seats." David held Ethan firmly, trying to calm him, while discreetly observing the visible instruments in the cockpit through the slightly open curtain. His experience as a pilot told him this was not ordinary turbulence. "It's okay, my love," he whispered to Ethan, but his eyes remained attentive to the crew's movements. Jennifer, who had been absorbed in her documents, finally looked up when a new wave of turbulence made the plane shake more violently. Her laptop almost slipped off her lap. "What's happening?" she asked the flight attendant who was hurrying down the aisle. "Just turbulence, ma'am. We'll be out of this area soon." But David noticed the disguised concern on the flight attendant's face. There was something else going on. 15 minutes passed, and the turbulence seemed to be getting worse instead of better. Ethan's crying intensified, and even David began to worry. Not about the turbulence itself, but about the aircraft's abnormal reaction. It was then that they heard the captain's altered voice over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have just been informed of a medical emergency in the cockpit. The captain has suddenly fallen ill. I ask everyone to remain calm while our team takes the necessary measures." A murmur of concern spread through the cabin. Jennifer completely dropped her documents, finally paying attention to what was happening around her. "A medical emergency?" she asked, addressing David directly for the first time. "What does that mean?" David continued rocking Ethan, but his expression was serious. "It means the main pilot can no longer command the aircraft," he replied, keeping his voice low so as not to alarm the other passengers. "And the co-pilot? He must be taking command now." 10 minutes later, the situation worsened drastically. The chief flight attendant's voice, clearly nervous, echoed through the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, we inform you that a second medical emergency has occurred in the cockpit. We are taking all necessary measures. Please remain calm and in your seats." This time, panic began to spread among the passengers. Altered voices echoed through the cabin, and even Jennifer seemed to lose her composure. "A second medical emergency?" she questioned, her voice betraying the nervousness she was trying to hide. "Does that mean that both pilots are incapacitated?" David completed, his calm voice contrasting with the growing chaos around them. The plane began to lose altitude gradually. David felt the change immediately, his experience allowing him to identify the signs the other passengers hadn't yet noticed. The plane's angle was changing, and the engines didn't sound as they should. Ethan was crying intensely now, sensing the tension in the air and reacting to his father's involuntary tightening grip. David forced himself to relax, knowing his calm was essential for both his son and the developing situation. "Sorry to ask," said Jennifer for the first time without her previous arrogance, "but you seem to know about aviation. What's really going on?" David looked her in the eyes, seeing the genuine fear behind her professional facade. "The situation is serious," he admitted. "With no qualified pilot, we need someone who can take the controls." It was at that moment that the head flight attendant appeared in the aisle, walking quickly between the seats with a desperate expression. She occasionally stopped to ask passengers something, but always moved on with the same look of urgency. When she got near them, David heard her ask the passenger in the seat ahead, "Do you happen to have any aviation experience?" "No, I'm sorry," the man replied, visibly nervous. The flight attendant continued her desperate search, and David felt the weight of responsibility grow in his chest. He knew he could help, but it would mean revealing his past and possibly putting himself in a situation he was no longer mentally prepared for. "Excuse me," he called softly as the flight attendant passed by them. The woman stopped immediately, hope shining in her eyes. "Yes, sir?" David hesitated, looking at Ethan in his arms. "I have aviation experience." The flight attendant practically ran to him. "What kind of experience?" "I'm a licensed commercial pilot, or I was. My license is still valid." Jennifer stared at him in disbelief. That simple man in a wrinkled shirt, whom she had looked down on for the entire flight, was a pilot. "Sir, please," the flight attendant begged, tears of relief welling in her eyes. "I need you to come with me immediately. The situation is critical." David looked at Ethan, who had finally stopped crying and was watching him with his big brown eyes. How could he leave his son to fly a plane? But how could he not, knowing that 200 lives depended on his decision? "I need someone to hold my son," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "I will," immediately offered the elderly passenger who had defended David earlier. Jennifer watched the scene in silence, finally understanding the magnitude of what was happening. That man she had treated with disdain throughout the flight might be the only thing standing between them and a tragedy. David gently kissed Ethan's forehead and handed him to the woman, who received him affectionately. "Take good care of him," David asked, his voice heavy with emotion. "As if he were my own grandson," the woman promised. As David stood up to follow the flight attendant, Jennifer impulsively grabbed his arm. "Wait," she said, her voice almost inaudible. I'm sorry for what I said before. I didn't know." David looked at her kindly, without a trace of resentment. "Didn't know what? That I was a pilot?" He smiled sadly. "That doesn't matter. What matters is how we treat each other, regardless of who we are or what we do." Jennifer felt as if she'd been punched in the stomach. The simplicity and dignity of this man made her ashamed of her own behavior. David followed the flight attendant toward the cockpit, leaving behind a transformed Jennifer and a plane full of passengers depending on him for survival. In the cockpit, the situation was even worse than David had imagined. The captain was unconscious, being attended to by another crew member, while the co-pilot also lay unconscious in his seat. "What happened to them?" asked David, immediately taking the pilot's seat. "Food poisoning," explained the chief flight attendant. "They ate the same food at the airport before the flight. The doctors attending to them believe it's something serious." David quickly analyzed the instruments on the panel. The plane was flying on autopilot, but had lost considerable altitude. They were at only 10,000 feet, well below the normal cruising level. "How long have they been unconscious?" he asked, while checking the aircraft's systems. "The captain fell ill 15 minutes ago, and the co-pilot 10 minutes ago." David took a deep breath. It had been over 2 years since he had flown commercially, and he had never flown that specific aircraft model, but the basic principles were the same, and his experience was intact. "I need to communicate with air traffic control," he said, adjusting his headset. "And you need to keep the passengers calm. Don't mention that I'm a passenger taking over the controls. That could cause more panic." While David took command of the aircraft, Jennifer remained in her seat, watching Ethan in the arms of the elderly passenger. The baby had completely calmed down, as if sensing that his father was doing something important. For the first time in years, Jennifer allowed herself to really observe a child. Ethan was beautiful, with the same gentle eyes as his father, and a serene expression that contrasted with the chaos around them. How had she been so blind as to see only a nuisance where she should have seen a dedicated father caring for his son? "He really is special," commented the lady holding Ethan. "Yes," agreed Jennifer, surprising herself with her own response. "And his father is too." "Do you know him?" Jennifer hesitated. "No, but I should have. At least I should have made an effort to get to know him." The lady smiled wisely. "It's never too late to correct our mistakes, dear." In the cockpit, David worked quickly to stabilize the aircraft. He managed to stop the descent and began to climb gradually back to cruising level. His fingers moved across the controls with the muscle memory from years of experience, even after so much time away from the cockpit. "Miami Control Tower, this is Flight 4847, he said over the radio. "We have a medical emergency in the cockpit. Both pilots are incapacitated. A qualified passenger has taken over the controls." The response came immediately, with notable concern in the controller's voice. "Flight 4847, Roger. What is your qualification?" "Licensed commercial pilot with 15 years of experience, David Mitchell, license number 4851. He paused. "But I haven't flown commercially in 2 years." "Understood, Commander Mitchell. We will prepare the emergency teams. What is your current situation?" David checked the instruments again. "Aircraft stable, sufficient fuel for normal arrival. Both pilots unconscious due to food poisoning. There are no other pilots on board." "Commander, can you perform the landing alone?" David felt the weight of the question. Landing a commercial aircraft with 200 people on board wasn't like riding a bike. It was an enormous responsibility, especially after so much time away from the profession. "Affirmative," he replied, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "But I will need guidance from the tower for specific procedures for this aircraft." "Understood. We will guide you step by step." Meanwhile, in the passenger cabin, people began to notice that something unusual was happening. The plane had stopped shaking and began to climb, indicating that someone was in control. But who? The chief flight attendant made another announcement, trying to stay calm. "Ladies and gentlemen, we inform you that the situation is under control. A qualified passenger has temporarily taken command of the aircraft. We ask that you remain calm and in your seats." "A passenger," someone murmured. "Which passenger?" Jennifer knew the answer, but remained silent. She watched Ethan, who was sleeping peacefully in the woman's arms, seemingly unaware that his father was saving everyone's life on board. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now, continuing. The next 40 minutes were the longest of David Mitchell's life. He piloted with precision, following air traffic control instructions, but his mind was divided between the aircraft's controls and worry for Ethan. How was his son reacting to his absence? Would the woman holding him know how to comfort him if he started to cry? And if something went wrong during the landing? Ethan would grow up without a father and without a mother, exactly what David had tried to avoid by leaving commercial aviation. But there was no choice. 200 lives depended on his skill, including the life of his own son. "Commander Mitchell," came the voice from the control tower, "you are approaching Miami airspace. Prepare to begin descent." "Understood," replied David, initiating approach procedures. It was then that he noticed the first serious problem. One of the navigation systems was showing an intermittent failure. It wasn't critical, but it would significantly complicate the landing, especially for someone who hadn't piloted that model before. "Tower, we have an intermittent failure in the primary navigation system," he informed them. "Received. Can you proceed with visual navigation and the secondary system?" David looked through the windshield. The weather was deteriorating rapidly, with thick clouds forming over Miami. A visual landing would be tricky, but not impossible. "Affirmative. But I will need constant guidance to compensate for the failure." In the passenger cabin, Jennifer noticed that something had changed. The plane began to descend and she could feel the change in pressure. They were approaching Miami. Ethan woke up and began looking around for his father with his eyes. When he didn't find him, he began to whimper softly. "Hey, little one," whispered the woman holding him. "Your daddy will be back soon." But Ethan wasn't easily comforted. He was used to his father's arms and began to cry louder. "Can I try?" asked Jennifer, holding out her arms. The woman hesitated for a moment, but then handed the baby to Jennifer. "Very slowly, he's sensitive to sudden movements." Jennifer received Ethan with extreme care. It was the first time in her life she had held a baby, and the feeling was completely new. The small but significant weight in her arms, the warmth of his little body, the way Ethan looked at her curiously through his tears. "Hi, Ethan," she whispered, using the name she had heard David say. "I'm Jennifer. Your daddy is working right now." To her surprise, Ethan stopped crying and stared at her intently. His big brown eyes studied her with the natural curiosity of babies. "You're beautiful," she continued, feeling a tenderness she didn't know existed. "And you have a very brave daddy." In the cockpit, David began the final descent into Miami. The airport was visible through the clouds, but the weather conditions continued to deteriorate. "Flight 4847, you are cleared to land on runway 28. Wind northeast at 15 knots, gusts to 20. Visibility 3 kilometers in light rain." It wasn't the ideal conditions for a pilot who hadn't flown in 2 years, but David had faced worse situations. He remembered an emergency landing he had performed years ago during a storm in New York City, when he saved 300 passengers from a catastrophic engine failure. That had been his last great feat as a pilot, the flight that established him as one of the best in the country. But it had also been traumatic, because among the passengers was an executive who had almost not survived due to complications during the flight. David never knew her name, but he remembered hearing that she ran a major aviation company. Focusing again on the present, he aligned the aircraft with the runway. The approach was perfect, despite the adverse conditions. His years of experience were making up for the time away from the cockpit. "Excellent approach, Captain," commented the tower controller. "Maintain speed and angle." David smiled slightly. It was good to be back, even if temporarily. He had forgotten how alive he felt while flying, the sensation of being in perfect sync with the machine. But his joy was interrupted when he noticed a new problem. The hydraulic system was showing low pressure. This would significantly affect the brakes during landing. "Tower, we have low hydraulic pressure," he informed. "I'm going to need more runway for braking." "Understood. Runway is clear. You have sufficient space. Emergency teams are positioned." David took a deep breath and focused entirely on the landing. It was now or never. In the cabin, the passengers realized they were on final approach. Jennifer held Ethan firmly but tenderly while watching the lights of Miami Airport approach through the window. "Your daddy is bringing us home," she whispered to Ethan, who watched her with sleepy eyes. The connection Jennifer felt with the baby was inexplicable. Throughout her entire life, she had avoided children, considering them loud and inconvenient. But holding Ethan awakened something maternal that she never knew she possessed. "If I could turn back time," she murmured to the lady beside her, "I would treat you all completely differently." "You still can," the woman replied wisely. "When we land, you can tell that to the boy's father." The plane touched down smoothly, despite the adverse conditions. David had executed a perfect landing, using all his experience to compensate for the system failures. The aircraft slid down the runway, gradually slowing until it came to a complete stop. A spontaneous round of applause echoed through the cabin. The passengers shouted with relief and joy, celebrating the safe landing. Jennifer felt tears stream down her face as she gently kissed Ethan's forehead. "We made it, little one," she whispered. "Your daddy made it." David shut down the engines and leaned back in the pilot's seat, exhausted but relieved. He had done it. 200 people were safe, including his son. The chief flight attendant entered the cockpit with tears in her eyes. "Captain, I don't know how to thank you. You saved all our lives." "I just did what any pilot would do," replied David, modest as always. "That's not true, and you know it. Few pilots could have accomplished what you did today." David stood up, eager to get back to his son. "How is Ethan?" "Your son is perfectly fine. By the way, there's a passenger who would very much like to speak with you." When David returned to the passenger cabin, he was greeted as a hero. The passengers stood up to applaud, many crying with emotion and gratitude. But he only had eyes for Ethan. Jennifer stood up with the baby in her arms, approaching him with an expression that mixed admiration, gratitude, and deep shame. "Captain," she said, using the title with genuine respect, "your son is an angel, and you saved our lives." David Mitchell picked up Ethan, feeling the relief of having his son safe again. The baby immediately snuggled against his father's chest, as if he knew he had been through something important. "Thank you for looking after him," David said to Jennifer, without any resentment in his voice. "Captain, I need to apologize to you," Jennifer continued, her voice trembling. "I was terrible to you the entire flight. I said horrible things. I treated you with contempt. And you saved my life and still treat me with kindness." David looked at her with compassion. "Ma'am, we all have bad days. What matters is how we choose to act when we realize our mistakes." "But you don't understand," Jennifer insisted. I think we've met before. 5 years ago, I was on a flight that made an emergency landing in New York City. Engine failure during a storm. They had to carry me off the plane on a stretcher because I developed heart problems during the flight." David studied her more closely and finally recognized her. "The executive from seat 12A, he murmured. "So you were unconscious when you left the plane." "You were the pilot of that flight?" Jennifer asked, incredulous. "Yes," David confirmed. "It was one of the most difficult situations I've ever faced, losing both engines during a storm, but we managed to land everyone safely." Jennifer knelt before him, tears streaming freely down her face. "You saved me twice," she sobbed. 5 years ago and today. And I treated you like garbage. I'm a horrible person." David bent down and gently helped Jennifer to her feet. "You're not horrible," he said sincerely. "You're human. We all make mistakes. What matters is what we do after we recognize them." "How can I make up for what I did?" Jennifer asked. "How can I prove I've changed?" David smiled, looking at Ethan in his arms. "You already have," he said. "You looked after my son when I couldn't. That's more than enough." But Jennifer shook her head. "It's not enough for me," she said with determination. "I need to do more. I want to do more." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out, now continuing. In the days following the flight, Jennifer couldn't get David and Ethan off her mind. The experience had profoundly changed her, making her question everything about her life and her priorities. She had discovered that David worked as an aviation mechanic in New York City, earning a fraction of what his skills deserved. She also learned that he had left commercial aviation to care for his son after his wife developed complications during childbirth. The story touched Jennifer in a way she never expected. Here was a man who had sacrificed everything out of love for his son, working a job that paid much less just to have flexible hours. And she, who had always prided herself on her toughness in business, had treated this man as inferior. Jennifer decided she needed to do something meaningful to make up for her behavior. Not out of guilt, but because she genuinely wanted to help, and because she had recognized in David and Ethan something her life had always lacked: unconditional love and genuine purpose. During her stay in Miami, where she had gone to close the business deal, Jennifer cancelled all social meetings and dedicated the time to reflecting on her life. At 42, she had achieved everything she had ever wanted professionally, but she felt emotionally empty. She had never married, claiming she had no time for relationships. She had never considered having children, viewing them as an obstacle to her career. But holding Ethan in her arms had awakened something she didn't even know existed. On the Wednesday after the flight, Jennifer made a decision that would change not only her life, but also David's and Ethan's. She picked up the phone and called her assistant in New York City. "Michael, I need you to find the address and phone number of a maintenance worker at LaGuardia Airport. Name, David Mitchell." "Ma'am, may I ask why?" "I have a job offer to make to him." 2 days later, David was at home playing with Ethan when the phone rang. It was an unknown number. "Hello? Commander Mitchell, this is Jennifer Reynolds. We met on the flight from Miami." David was surprised. Why would the executive who had treated him with disdain be calling him? "Good afternoon, Mrs. Reynolds. How did you get my number?" "Commander, I would like to speak with you in person. Would it be possible for us to meet? I have a proposal for you." David hesitated. He wasn't used to executives calling his home, especially this particular executive. "A proposal? A job proposal. But I'd rather discuss it in person. Could you come to my office tomorrow morning?" David looked at Ethan, who was playing on the floor with his toys. "Ma'am, I work during the week. I only have weekends free." "Then let's make it Saturday morning, please, Commander. It's very important." The sincerity in Jennifer's voice convinced him. "All right, but I'll need to bring my son with me." "Of course. In fact, I was hoping to get to know Ethan better." On Saturday morning, David arrived at the impressive commercial building that housed Jennifer's company headquarters. With Ethan in his arms, he felt a little intimidated by the grandeur of the place, but maintained his dignified posture. The secretary greeted them with a warm smile and took them directly to Jennifer's office on the 30th floor. The panoramic view of New York City was impressive, but David was more curious about the reason for the meeting. Jennifer stood up when they entered, and David noticed she looked different, less severe, more human. "Commander, thank you so much for coming," she said, approaching. "And hello, Ethan." To David's surprise, Ethan smiled at Jennifer, stretching his little arms toward her. "He remembers you," David commented, amazed. "May I hold him?" David handed Ethan to Jennifer, who received him with the same tenderness she had shown on the plane. "He's grown," she observed, even though only a few days had passed. "Children grow fast," David confirmed. "Mrs. Reynolds, you mentioned a job proposal?" Jennifer pointed to the comfortable armchairs in front of her desk. "Please sit down and call me Jennifer." When they were settled, Jennifer took a deep breath before beginning. "David, over the last few days, I haven't been able to stop thinking about what happened on that flight. Not just the fact that you saved our lives, but how I behaved toward you and Ethan." "Jennifer, that's all in the past." "No, it's not," she interrupted. "At least not for me, because it revealed something very ugly about who I had become, and it also revealed something very beautiful about who you are." David remained silent, allowing her to continue. "I found out that you're an aviation mechanic, working for a fraction of what you should earn as a pilot. I learned that you left commercial aviation to care for Ethan after you lost your wife, and that made me realize you are exactly the kind of person my company needs." "I don't understand." Jennifer stood up, still holding Ethan, and walked to the window. "David, my company manufactures safety components for civil aviation. We produce navigation, hydraulic, structural systems, Everything that keeps planes running safely. I know that, David confirmed. I work with your products daily. Jennifer turned to face him. And what do you think of our products? The question took David by surprise. He hesitated, not wanting to offend. Well, they are quality products. David, please be honest. Your professional opinion is exactly what I need to hear. David considered his words carefully. If you really want to know, some of your more recent products have been showing flaws that concern me, especially the line of navigation systems. I've reported several intermittent failures, but no one listened to you, Jennifer completed. I know, I found out that you sent detailed reports to our technical department over the last 6 months, and all of them were ignored. David was surprised. How did you find that out? Because I ordered an investigation, and you know what else I found out? That the failure that almost caused an accident on our flight was exactly in one of the systems you had identified as problematic. The revelation left David shocked. The navigation system that failed, it was from my company, Jennifer confirmed, her voice filled with guilt. If we had listened to your reports, that failure would never have happened. Ethan began to squirm restlessly on Jennifer's lap, and she rocked him gently to calm him. That's why I need you, David. I need someone with your experience, your integrity, and your dedication to safety to lead our quality control department. Jennifer, that's very generous, but the offer includes a salary 3 times your current one, full health insurance for you and Ethan, on-site daycare, and flexible hours so you can continue being the dedicated father you are. David was speechless. The offer was far beyond anything he could have imagined. There's more, Jennifer continued. I want to implement a revolutionary safety program at the company. You would be the director, reporting directly to me. You would have full authority to recommend product changes, halt production lines if necessary, and ensure we never ignore safety alerts again. Jennifer, why are you doing this? She moved closer and handed Ethan back to David. Because you saved me, not just on the plane, but as a person. You opened my eyes to the kind of person I had become, and the kind of person I want to be. David looked at Ethan, then at Jennifer. I need to think about it. Of course, it's an important decision, but there's one condition. What? Jennifer smiled, but there were tears in her eyes. That you let me be part of your lives, not as a boss, but as a friend. I found that holding Ethan awakened something in me I never knew existed. And seeing your dedication as a father made me realize I've been missing the most important things in life. David saw the sincerity in Jennifer's eyes and knew her transformation was genuine. Ethan needs positive female figures in his life, he said softly. It would be an honor to have you as our friend. 2 weeks later, David started his new job as Director of Safety and Quality at Jennifer's company. The change in his life was dramatic, but he adapted quickly to the new environment. His first action was to implement a rigorous field report analysis system. Every aviation mechanic in the country could send reports directly to him, ensuring no safety problem was ignored. Jennifer, for her part, kept her word about being part of David and Ethan's life. On Saturdays, she would visit their apartment, helping with household chores and playing with Ethan. He discovered he had a natural talent for caring for children and that he loved the simplicity of family life. Ethan quickly became attached to Jennifer, affectionately calling her Aunt Jen. Seeing the baby smile when she arrived became the most anticipated moment of Jennifer's week. During the first months of work, David identified and corrected dozens of potential flaws in the company's products. His dedication to safety and his practical experience saved countless lives, preventing accidents that could have been catastrophic. Jennifer watched David's work with growing admiration. He not only fulfilled his professional responsibilities with excellence, but he did so with a humility and integrity she had never seen in the corporate world. "How do you manage to stay so grounded?" she asked him one day as they worked together analyzing reports. "Ethan," David replied simply, "everything I do with him in mind. I want to leave a safer world for my son." The answer touched Jennifer deeply. Throughout her entire career, she had been motivated by profit and recognition, But watching David made her realize that true achievements came from purposes greater than oneself. 6 months after starting at the new company, David faced his first major test. During a routine inspection, he discovered a serious flaw in a batch of components that had already been approved for delivery. The flaw could cause fatal accidents if the components were installed. The problem was that the batch was worth $10 million and had already been paid for by the client. Halting the delivery would mean not only losing money, but also facing potential lawsuits. David took his findings directly to Jennifer. "The entire batch needs to be recalled," he said, presenting the data. "We cannot allow these components to be installed." Jennifer analyzed the reports. The decision would be costly, but there was no doubt about the seriousness of the flaws. "Recall everything," she said without hesitation, "and start production of a new batch immediately." "Jennifer, this is going to cost—" "I don't care about the cost," she interrupted. "You taught me that some things are more important than money. People's safety is one of them." Jennifer's decision sent shockwaves through the company. Some executives questioned her leadership, arguing that she was being overly cautious. But 3 weeks later, when independent tests confirmed that the defective components would have caused catastrophic failures, everyone understood that David and Jennifer had made the right decision. The story leaked to the press, and Jennifer's company was praised for its integrity and commitment to safety. Sales, instead of decreasing, increased significantly as customers began to trust the quality of the products more. "How did you know it would work out?" David asked one evening, as they had dinner together in his apartment. "I didn't know," admitted Jennifer, playing with Ethan on her lap. "But I learned from you that doing the right thing is worth any risk." The relationship between David and Jennifer continued to deepen throughout the first year of work. There was nothing romantic between them. Instead, they developed a genuine friendship based on mutual respect and shared values. Jennifer became a constant presence in Ethan's life, participating in important milestones like his first steps and first words. She also supported David when he decided to start flying recreationally on weekends again, renting a small aircraft to keep his skills sharp. "You don't plan on returning to commercial aviation?" she asked him one day. "I think about it sometimes," David confessed, "but my priority is Ethan, and I like the work we do here. I feel like I'm making a real difference in aviation safety." "And you are," confirmed Jennifer. "Aviation accidents in the United States have decreased 15% since we implemented your protocols." David took pride in the improvements they had achieved together, but his greatest satisfaction came from seeing Ethan growing up in an environment of love and stability. On Ethan's first birthday, Jennifer organized a special party in the garden of her home. She had bought a larger house specifically to host David and Ethan more comfortably, turning one of the rooms into a special space for the baby. "You didn't have to do all this," said David, observing the elaborate airplane-themed decorations. "Of course I did," replied Jennifer, adjusting the little party hat on Ethan's head. "You are my family now." The word family took David by surprise. He had never thought of Jennifer in those terms, but he realized that was exactly what she had become, family. During the party, Margaret, David's mother, pulled Jennifer aside. "Dear, thank you for taking care of my son and my grandson," said the 70-year-old woman with tears in her eyes. "Mrs. Mitchell, I should be the one thanking you. They have completely transformed my life." "I know," smiled Ethan's grandmother, "and I can see you've transformed their lives too." David hasn't smiled like that since he lost Sarah. Jennifer watched David playing with Ethan in the garden and had to agree he seemed lighter and happier than when she met him on the plane. That evening, after the guests had left, David helped Jennifer clean the house while Ethan slept in the special room she had prepared. "Jennifer, I need to tell you something," David began, putting away dishes in the kitchen. "Of course. Go ahead. I want to thank you, not just for the job, the opportunity, the support, but for becoming part of our lives in such a special way." Jennifer stopped what she was doing and turned to him. "David, I should be the one thanking you. Before I met you, I had success, money, professional recognition, but I didn't have a life. I didn't have love. I didn't have a purpose beyond making more money. And now? Now I have a family, she said, with tears in her eyes. I have work that truly matters, making a difference in people's lives. I have Ethan, who teaches me every day about unconditional love. And I have you, who showed me that true strength doesn't come from toughness, but from kindness. David stepped closer and hugged Jennifer as he would hug a sister. Thank you for accepting us into your life, he whispered. Thank you for accepting me into your lives, she replied. 2 years passed, and the lives of David, Ethan, and Jennifer had settled into a happy and productive routine. Jennifer's company became a global reference in aviation safety, with David being recognized internationally for his contributions to civil aviation. Ethan grew up surrounded by love and attention, developing into an intelligent and affectionate child. By 2.5, he already showed a fascination with airplanes, just like his father did in childhood. Jennifer had found her true purpose in life. Besides leading a prosperous company, she became involved in various social initiatives, especially programs supporting single parents in aviation. She created a foundation that offered scholarships, childcare, and psychological support for aviation professionals who needed to balance career and family. Have you ever thought about getting married again? Jennifer asked one day as they watched Ethan play in the park. The question caught David off guard. Honestly, no. Ethan takes up all my time and energy, and I have you and Mom to support us. I don't feel like we're missing anything. What if Ethan wanted a mother? David looked at his son, who was happily chasing a butterfly. I think he already does, he replied, smiling at Jennifer. Not biologically, but he has a mother figure who loves him unconditionally. Jennifer felt her heart warm at David's words. And I have a son I never imagined I'd have, she murmured, and a brother I never knew I needed. The conversation was interrupted when Ethan ran up to them, shouting excitedly, Daddy! Aunt Jen! Look at the airplane! They looked up and saw a commercial airliner passing overhead, leaving a white trail in the blue sky. One day I'm going to fly one of those, declared Ethan with the confidence of a child. David and Jennifer exchanged looks, both knowing that if Ethan really wanted to be a pilot, he would have all the support and guidance he needed. First, you need to grow up a lot, said David, picking up his son. And study hard, added Jennifer. I will, promised Ethan, and I'll be the best pilot in the world, just like Daddy. David felt his eyes fill with tears. Ethan's admiration for him was both a blessing and a responsibility. He wanted to always be worthy of that admiration. You know what you need to be more than a good pilot? David asked his son. What? A good person. Kind, honest, someone who cares about others. Like Aunt Jen taught me we should be. Ethan looked seriously at Jennifer. Aunt Jen, do you teach Daddy to be good? Jennifer laughed, hugging them both. Actually, it was your dad who taught me to be a better person. So you teach each other, concluded Ethan with the simple logic of children. That's exactly right, agreed David. That's how a family works. In that moment, sitting in the park with Ethan between them, David and Jennifer realized they had found something rare and precious. A true family built not by blood ties, but by the bonds of love, respect, and mutual dedication. Life had tested them both in different ways. David had faced the loss of his wife and the responsibility of raising a son alone. Jennifer had faced the discovery that her professional success was empty without genuine human connections. But together, they had built something greater than the sum of their parts. A unique family where each contributed their own gifts and strengths to support the others. Years later, when Ethan was already in school, he wrote an essay about his family that deeply touched both David and Jennifer. My family is different from others. My dad is the bravest man in the world. He saved many people by flying airplanes, and now he saves even more people by making airplanes safer. My mom isn't my real mom, but she is my mom in my heart. She has taken care of me since I was a baby and loves me as if I were her own real son. My family is small, but it is full of love. Dad always says that family isn't just who you are born to, but who chooses to stay together and take care of each other. I chose my family and they chose me too. When the teacher showed the essay to David and Jennifer, they both cried with emotion. He understood, whispered Jennifer. Even though he's so young, he understood what really matters. "Children always understand true love," replied David. "That's what makes them so special." That day, David and Jennifer realized that their journey, which had begun with an unpleasant encounter on an airplane, had turned into something beautiful and lasting. They had created not just a family, but a legacy of love, integrity, and dedication that Ethan would carry with him for the rest of his life. Fate had put that single father and that arrogant CEO on the same flight for a reason. Not only so that he could save their lives physically, but so that both could save each other's souls, creating a family that proved true love transcends social conventions and expectations. And so, that story, which began with disdain and differences, turned into a testament to the transformative power of love, of second chances, and of the family we choose for ourselves. End of story. And what did you think of this story, dear listeners? Do you believe a situation like this could completely change people's lives? Have you ever experienced or witnessed such profound transformations through an unexpected encounter? Share your experiences with Second Chances in the comments and how love can arise in the most unlikely moments. Don't forget to leave a like if the story moved you and subscribe to the channel for more touching stories like this one.